across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart TV, on the app. The home of common sense. This is Talk.
Welcome back. Right, so from knife crime to VAT on school fees. I have talked about this before, but this is a different angle today. News has reached us this morning through the popular press that actually the intention, as it is, of the Labour Party to increase school fees to all of those paying private school fees in Britain by way of adding VAT to those fees, so 20% on top, so pretty much £5,000 on top of the average £25,000 per year private school fee. It turns out, according to some, that in their opinion, and we'll get a barrister's opinion on this in a second, it may actually be unlawful to do so, which would be a saving grace, I suppose, from the point of view of private school educated children's parents, but also would be somewhat ironic, wouldn't it, that a Labour Party that seems to often want to align itself more closely with the EU, and we've certainly heard that in this campaign from Labour, that they do want closer ties and a better relationship with the EU, whatever that means. Does that mean freedom of movement? Keir Starmer says absolutely not. However, the irony would be that introducing VAT on education could be unlawful from the point of view of the European Court of Human Rights, of course, which we are still under the auspices of. So look, I've got two guests joining me now down the line. One of them is the principal of Tring Park School for the Performing Arts, Simon Larter Evans. Simon, thanks for joining me. And the other is, of course, a friend of the show, absolute big-brained legal expert, Andrew Eborn, who's a barrister and broadcaster. Thanks for joining me, both of you gentlemen.
Great to be back.
Let me ask you first of all, Simon. So I guess straight question. I mean, your school is a fee-paying school, I presume.
Yes, it is.
And so I would take a wild guess that you're not in favour of VAT being added to school fees as per Labour's potential policy if they're elected to Downing Street this coming week.
It's just to put us into context. We're a specialist performing arts school, and our young people come to us on talent first. Many of our children are not ordinarily the kinds of children that would go to an independent school, so our parents are already on the fine edge of what they can afford. A lot of our money that comes in then goes back out in bursaries. So the challenge for us is that if there's a VAT imposition, those bursaries evaporate. So we can't offer talent based on talent anymore. And it starts to denude the whole offer. We're very expensive schools to run. And I think it's interesting that the VAT is a tax lever that a left-leaning government is thinking of applying, because by its nature it's regressive and it hits the least able to afford things hardest, fastest.
And an honest answer from you, Simon. What do you think the effect will be on your school specifically in terms of demand for your school services as a consequence of this policy being enacted?
Well, we don't know the detail yet on what that will actually look like, but people can join the dots. There will be fewer people that will be able to afford to come to the school. And that, in the end, we feed fantastic talent into the creative industries. And this is the other thing I'm finding frustrating, really, is that the Labour Party are also very supportive of the arts, and they want to support the creative sector. We have one of the best creative sectors in the world. It accounts for 6% of GDP. So anything that damages talent development and provision into that sector doesn't seem to make a great deal of sense to me.
Well, no, so it's certainly going to hurt the, I guess, the integrity and the progress, the potential of your sector, as in the entertainment industry. But I guess this also would apply to special educational schools. I mean, maybe Labour haven't really thought this through. Well, let's talk to Andrew Eborn now, obviously, who has perhaps a legal perspective on this. The point of discussing this today, Andrew, is that it seems that there might be some legal issues, or indeed a potential legal challenge here, from whom I don't know, maybe from the Conservative Party if they were to lose the election and the Labour Party were to be elected on Thursday. Do you think there's any merit in this supposition that actually adding school fee VAT to school fees might be in some way unlawful?
Oh, there's much more than merit. This is politics before pupils, and basically the pernicious politics of envy is what's causing this. And Simon has highlighted the devastating effect that this is going to come. But basically, it's a flagrant breach of what is the European Convention on Human Rights. And there are two relevant clauses, which I'll quote you because it's a Sunday. And these come from Article 2 of the first protocol to the Convention and Article 14, which basically protect the right to education and against attempt to remove or impede the right to access to a broad range of schools. So that's what it says in the European Convention of Human Rights. And this is a flagrant breach of that European Convention. And it's absolutely appalling that Labour even polishing this as a potential policy. And it could be a potential silver bullet to Starmageddon if it's not actually looked at. So I think we need to look at this. And we've been here before, Russell. It's been looked at by previous Labour governments, and they've touted about introducing VAT. And some of the top legal minds in the country have warned against it and warned that it is potentially illegal and could open them up to challenges. So they either haven't thought it through very, very much, or they're deliberately flouting the European Convention on Human Rights, in which case this needs to be addressed, and addressed very, very quickly.
And Andrew, yes, you refer to the fact that this has been touted before. I think back in the 80s, when the Labour Party were considering doing exactly this, they received advice, didn't they? I think from Lord Panic, a crossbench Lord, who is a KC, a King's Counsel, who was very clear that this probably does breach European law. So on that basis, I mean, presumably the Labour Party now, today, will be aware of that advice. Why are they running roughshod over that advice that still applies and carrying on with this policy if actually it could be subject to challenge?
Yeah, well, it's not only subject to challenge, it will be challenged. And I think the reality is that people should, the next question time, in addition to having a pop at Nigel, they should turn around to the Labour Party and say, like, why are you deliberately going for a flagrant breach of the European Convention of Human Rights? They've been here before. As you mentioned, it was there in the 80s. We've had a look under various Labour leaders who first of all said they were going to abolish public schools altogether, and then looked at the whole idea about VAT. They took legal advice, and at the time, the legal advice said there was this potential breach. And they therefore dropped it as a policy. So why have they now gone back to this? Are they now going to disregard the European Convention on Human Rights? It's a legitimate question and one that should be answered.
Or a cynic like me would say that perhaps it's Labour Party populism at the time of an election because it plays to a crowd that they want to play to. Simon, let me ask you, do you think that you might get together with other schools and attempt some sort of, I don't think you can have class actions in Britain, but a group litigation order perhaps in terms of some joint action against the government if this is enacted as policy? Is that something you might consider?
That's a really interesting idea. There are lots of association groups that are coming together to think about where the impact of this would look like. I'm not a lawyer, so I think it would be reckless.
You've got one here right now that might help you. You've got one here now that might help.
I mean,
and I've never lost a case.
It's a really interesting idea. I suppose my preference would be to actually have proper dialogue with the Labour Party, because we've seen a real campaign of silence on the detail here. I absolutely get it, and no one is saying that the provision of education in this country needs to be better for absolutely every child. It's just that this particular policy seems to be a really muddled way of achieving anything.
It's not been thought through at all, Simon, has it?
Well, it doesn't appear to be. No, I agree.
Yeah, I mean, they haven't accounted for the fact that not only will it affect schools by way of unintended consequences like yours and special educational schools, but also the fact that if you were to see, let's say, I don't know, even a quarter of private school educated children decamp into the state sector, how are the government possibly then going to somehow cope with resources with regard to finding those places, let alone funding them? And of course the lost revenue from that 150,000 students that then won't be subject to VAT and therefore puts a hole in the Labour Party budget.
Well,
it's exactly that.
Yeah.
I was also going to say, I know of other schools, not just special needs schools and schools where they teach the performing arts, which basically I know some schools have already closed in anticipation that they're not going to be able to afford. Because basically people save up hard earnings, if you like, the hard-working people, as Keir Starmer likes to remind us, they save up their money to get the best education possible for their children. As a result of an extra 20% on that, there will be several people who will not be able to afford it. And as a result, the net result will actually be far worse. Classrooms will swell. The demand on resources, which are already overstretched, will be even worse. And in any event, as I say, it's a flagrant breach of the European Convention on Human Rights.
And Andrew, you mentioned the politics of envy, which is a phrase that obviously is bandied around, but this, many would agree, I think, falls into that category. It's, of course, not millionaires necessarily that send their children to schools for the performing arts or indeed private schools. I mean, often it's grandparents that are using their savings to pay the school fees.
Absolutely
often it's,
right.
On this show only 2 weeks ago, I had a lady call me that said that she works 7 days a week, as does her husband, simply to put their one child through private school. So this does seem to be ill thought out. And I wonder, gentlemen, do you think this might be the first Labour U-turn if they were to take government on Friday?
Well, I can tell you they should do it beforehand. It needs to be asked before people go to the polls on Thursday. There are lots of questions which are not being answered. And you talk about those sort of things. They haven't talked about a number of things, about fully funding policies. We hear all these wonderful sound bites. But Starmageddon is inevitable unless we get the answers before the election. People are entitled to know, is Labour deliberately flouting European Convention on Human Rights? It's a legitimate question. We should get somebody from the Labour Party.
Which, Andrew, is something that they've spent many, many years criticising the Conservative government for doing.
Absolutely. So hypocrisy stinks.
It is,
and so we need to look at that.
Gentlemen, thank you very much indeed for your contribution. Very, very productive. Let's hope it is, from my point of view, the first of, I think, perhaps many Labour U-turns, should they be returned as government as of the election next week. Let's take a break. I'm Russell Quirk. This is Talk Back Straight.